I woke with a start to find my hands loosely gripping the steering wheel, the tires spinning their soft tune beneath our feet. The car was drifting lazily toward the guardrail, and a vast swampland of unknown depths beyond that. Heart quickly ticking in my chest, I turned the wheel slightly and aimed straight ahead once more, hands trembling, thinking about what might have happened had I not snapped awake when I did. Sleep had only taken me momentarily. Rocky outcrops and marshland passed on either side of the vehicle as we sped down the Trans-Canada Highway, far out in the middle of nowhere. It was a dark, moonless night, and dawn was still a long way off. Christine was fast asleep in the seat next to me, so she hadn't noticed my lapse. But the dog was whining in the back seat, full of anxiety. Was that what had awoken me? After blinking a few times, the twisting, dark highway came into focus again, illuminated in the high beams of my old beat-up Civic. We'd been driving for over 12 hours, and my eyelids were past the point of just feeling heavy with the weight of sleep. They now seemed to be filled with lead, and I imagined ticking gears above them pushing downward constantly against my efforts. Why had I talked Christine out of stopping at a motel for the night? It was the most sensible thing to do, I was realizing now. The car could have easily gone into a swamp or a rock wall. There were plenty of those around. Should we stop for the night, Gibson? I asked my old blonde Cocker Spaniel in the back seat. Huh? What? My wife woke up with an anxious cry, and I swerved slightly in surprise. At least there were no other cars at this time of night. It was 3 a.m., and the road was completely abandoned. Where are we? She mumbled, blinking. Still a couple hours from Ottawa. Can't understand how you're still driving. Honestly, I feel like I could pass out any second, I said, leaving out the part where I had done just that. Next motel I see, we're stopping for the night. Hallelujah to that, she said, yawning. She looked to be in worse shape than me. We had both been working overtime lately, not getting enough sleep. This vacation was supposed to be our opportunity to catch up on some long overdue relaxation time. Just then, a motel came into sight on the right-hand side of the highway, as if summoned magically by our words. It was an old-fashioned type of place with a palpable nostalgia oozing from it. I slowed down and pulled into the gravel lot, parking the car in one of the empty spots. There were plenty to choose from. The place looked like an older motel, perhaps built in the 50s, as it had been decorated with that era in mind. A large sign overhead had a giant red horseshoe painted on it, and proclaimed the place to be named Horseshoe Acres Roadside Motel. The word vacancy was printed on the sign below that, so I hoped we would be in luck. Places like this could be found every so often along Highway 7, open all night long for travelers such as ourselves traversing the country along the scenic route. As I was getting out of the car, Gibson started to whine loudly and then bark. Shrill, agonized, high-pitched yelps unlike anything I'd ever heard from her before. Christine shushed and scolded her, quieting her down before she could wake up any of the other guests. I waited nervously for lights to begin turning on, one by one, but none did. There was a light on beside the burgundy-painted entrance door, which seemed to indicate someone was awake and able to check us in for the night. Stretching, I walked toward it, a sinking feeling beginning to grow in my gut, like a cinder block was now sitting inside of it. The office was brightly lit when I went inside, an old wood-paneled radio playing in one corner. A pasty white man wearing thick, black, horn-rimmed glasses sat behind the desk, wearing a tan-patterned shirt that looked like it had escaped from the 50s. In fact, everything about the office and the man looked to be from that era. The radio, the calendar, the black rotary phone on the desk. The guy was obviously a very enthusiastic collector, and I immediately assumed he was the owner of the motel. "Hi, I was hoping to rent a room for the night," I said awkwardly. He stood up and smiled impishly at me, his teeth sparkling white and large. "You and the gal pal need a room to shack up for the night?" His head tilted questioningly. The man was putting off the creepiest vibes imaginable. His pale face looked back at mine with an unknowable expression, eyes bugging out as if he was in constant surprise, the white showing prominently behind his glasses. "How much is it for the room?" "We're only going to be here for a few hours," I said, feeling unsettled. My bowels tied in knots just looking at this man and talking to him. His smile was off-putting, as were his words and his mannerisms. It made me want to look somewhere else. Anywhere else. He was also making disturbingly unbroken eye contact. I remembered again that it was 3 a.m. and we were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded on all sides by swampland, cornfields, and more of the same for miles and miles. I imagined him suddenly pulling a knife from beneath the counter, instead of a room key, and running the rusty, pitted blade across my carotid before watching the blood spurt out, dancing in the fountain of its crimson spray and holding his tongue out, tasting its coppery tang. Pushing that thought away, I brought my eyes up to look at him, feeling that immediate sense of revulsion and displeasure creep back again. "Let's get one thing straight. This ain't no fast sheet motel. $5 for you and the missus. No wedding ring. So I'm assuming you need a double?" He winked at me slyly. "We'll take a single if you have one," I said, pulling out a card and not really thinking at the time about how absurdly low of a price that was. Too tired to notice what he'd even said until later. "Whatever that is, we don't take it. If you don't got the bread, you can beat feet. You and your date can go back to playing backseat bingo." "Oh, okay," I responded, thoroughly confused. "You take debit?" He just laughed at that and shook his head, looking ready to kick me out. Then he saw the antique watch on my wrist, a gift from my deceased father, and his eyes widened even further than before. "I'll take that as collateral. How's that? Give me the watch and you can have the room. Tomorrow you can go to the bank in town and grab the cash. Pay me back, assuming you're good for it, and I'll give you the watch back. Deal?" He pretended to spit on his palm and stuck it out for me to shake. Vaguely disgusted, I took it and shook with him, handing over the watch that I loved so dearly. I was too tired to argue at that point, and besides, the watch wasn't valuable. It was just sentimental to me. "Oh, one last thing," he said as I was about to leave the office. "Try not to wake the other guests. They might not take kindly to it." With that odd and ominous warning, I left the office with the key in hand. After examining the wooden placard attached to it, I saw the key belonged to the room at the very end. Room 14 was just past our car. Once again, Gibson put up a fuss. She stood in front of the door to room 14 and planted her feet, refusing to budge. I picked her up and carried her inside, while Christine opened the door with our key. We left our luggage in the car, too exhausted to bother with changing out of our sweaty, travel-worn clothes for the night. The room was reminiscent of the office, wood-paneled with plain browns and off-white paint, fashioned after the 1950s motel decor we're all familiar with from classic movies and television. The chairs were angular and minimalistic, uncomfortable looking. The couch was similarly retro, colored in an indigo sort of shade that was reminiscent of that time period. It was obviously the theme of this place. 2 simple beds were made with rough-looking sheets. I immediately threw myself down on the one closest to the door, and Christine sprawled out on the other one. "Hey, we got 2 beds," You better believe I'm going to stretch out over here for the night. No offense. None taken. I don't want to sleep with you either. You've got the Jimmy legs, I said jokingly. She smiled back sleepily. Well, you snore. I'm going to sleep. I'm completely exhausted. Can you put out a bowl of water for Gibson? Oh, fine, I said with mock annoyance. Come on, Gibson. Want a drink of water? But Gibson did not seem to hear. She was sitting by the front door of the motel, scratching at it as if she wanted to be let out. Ah, shit. I forgot to take her over to the grass before bringing her inside. Hang on. I'll be back in a minute. I took the dog outside with her leash on and led her over to the grass. I figured she'd have to pee, but she didn't. She just sat there, staring at the motel and whining, looking pensive and upset. We're just spending the night, Gibby. It's not like it's our new home or anything. That didn't seem to reassure her, and her whining only increased in pitch. She made no effort to urinate or do anything else I thought she needed to do, so I brought her back inside. That's weird, I said, closing the door behind me. I thought for sure she'd have to go. But Christine was already fast asleep in the other bed. So I filled a bowl of water for the dog and got into bed myself, checking the sheets quickly for any bugs or conspicuous stains. At least I couldn't find any of those. The bed was hard and the blankets were rough and abrasive, but I settled in quickly enough and turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. Gibson was sitting at the door, scratching at it to be let out, and that was the last thing I remembered seeing in the light. Absolute darkness filled the room, and I heard Christine's slow breathing turn into light snoring in the bed next to me. At some point, I felt the dog get up on the bed, and she laid down next to me, her weight sinking into the mattress. As I began to fall asleep, though, I heard the sound of scratching at the door, and Gibson's distinct whine coming from there. But then, who was in the bed beside me? My mind did not consciously take in this discrepancy, and it registered more as a growing apprehension which invaded my dreams and consumed them with impending terror. I slept and imagined the room was lit dimly with blue light, streaming in through the windows. The surreal sensation increased as I peered over at who was lying next to me in the bed. It was a woman. A gorgeous woman with chestnut brown hair and green eyes. Her lips bright red and glossy. She was gorgeous, and she was completely naked. A feeling of infidelity creeped over me as I thought about my wife sleeping in the bed just next to mine. How had this woman gotten in here? I tried to say something, but found my lips wouldn't move. I tried to get up and found myself incapable of moving. As I looked at the woman, paralyzed and unable to run away, I saw her suddenly begin to age. Her skin developed sunspots, then wrinkles which formed around the edges of her lips and eyes, and her dimples turned to laugh lines and then creases. She was aging quickly, looking 50, then 60, 70, then 80, until she was a necrotic, gray-looking, undead corpse, with flesh beginning to disintegrate and slough off in places, revealing yellow and white patches of fat and glimpses of bone beneath. I tried to scream, horrified, but once again was unable to open my mouth. I tried to scramble off the bed to get away. Couldn't move an inch. I was completely paralyzed. She smiled widely at me, seeming not to notice my horror, and leaned in for a kiss. Her black, rotten tongue stuck out, as if to passionately French kiss me. I could not turn away, as much as I tried. Her decaying, slippery, wet, dead flesh made contact with mine as she embraced me. "Enough!" came a voice suddenly from the doorway. The familiar voice of the motel owner. I shot awake instantly. Shaking, I moved away from the side of the bed where I felt the weight of someone lying next to me. Looking at the bed, I expected to see the dead woman, but saw only blackness. Darkness filled the room, and on such a moonless night, where there was no light with which to see, nothing to placate my racing, panic-stricken mind, Gibson was growling low in her throat by the door, confirming my unease. Unsettled, I reached beside me, feeling for the lamp on the table next to the bed. I groped for it blindly, unable to find the switch to turn it on. My trembling hand was feeling blindly, desperately for it. Finally, I found the light with my hand and pushed in the little peg to turn the lamp on. What I saw in the next brief moment will haunt me until the end of my days. But as soon as the light went on, just as quickly it switched off again, a loud popping sound indicating the light bulb had burnt out. In that brief flash of light before the bulb gave out its life, I saw the face of death beside me. The woman from my dream, skin sloughing off, dead and aged like a corpse in the grave, was lying in bed beside me. Maggots were falling off of her, littering the sheets, crawling and squirming onto me. Fat black flies were buzzing all around the room, and as she opened her mouth to speak, more came flying out at me from inside her lipstick-smeared maw. The darkness was total again when the light burned out, and I fell from the bed, landing hard on the floor in my attempt to get away from the woman. I ran to the door and flipped on the light switch, or tried to, but there was nothing there. No switch, no door, nothing. I heard the sound of her getting out of the bed, the old spring squeaking as she stood to her feet, and then she began to walk towards me, the sound of her footfalls getting louder in the pitch-black room. As she drew near, the hair stood up on the back of my neck, and I screamed, more afraid than I had ever been in my life. I don't know what might have happened if not for the rising of the sun at just that moment in time. A faint light creeped in through the windows, imperceptibly at first, then just enough to make out the features of the dead woman. When the light hit her face, she began to flake away like ash. She slowed mid-stride, decelerating just before she reached me, her hands hooked out like talons. Long, black nails, sharp at the ends, angled toward my throat. All of these things, her entire body, began to drift away on a sudden draft that came from the windows behind me. The whole room was suddenly flaking like old paint, drifting up and into the air like the ashes of a newspaper thrown onto a campfire, reddened with heat at the edges for just a moment before lifting off and disappearing. Soon, I found myself standing in the blackened, burnt-out husk of an abandoned, derelict motel room. The roof was sinking perilously down in the middle, looking like it could fall in at any second. There was no dead woman anymore, as she had now disappeared in the morning wind. A few twirling ashes was all that was left of her. Christine was awake now, having risen to the sound of my screams. She looked disbelievingly around the charred interior of the motel room, her mouth opening and closing with no words coming out. Before either of us could say anything, I heard a siren whoop from very close by. The burnt door to the room was hanging off its hinges. I opened it, helping Christine and Gibson outside before stepping out into the moist dawn air. A policeman was getting out of his car, eyeing us up and down concernedly. We probably looked as terrible as we felt, if not worse, covered in black smudges and ash from sleeping inside. Surprisingly, he didn't give us a hard time about trespassing in the dangerous property. I found out later on that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. The burnt-out remains of the Horseshoe Acres Roadside Motel were well known for leaving people scarred for life. "What are you folks doing in that place? You more of those ghost hunters?" he asked. "I don't think I need to tell you, it's not safe in there." I turned around and saw what he meant. The building was a blacked-out husk of its former glory, as we had seen it a few hours before. A fire had obviously taken it at some point in the past, and its roof was blackened and sunken in, holes visible in places. The walls also were riddled with gaps and holes where fire had eaten through and been left unrepaired. No, not ghost hunters. I feel like I've seen enough ghosts to last me the rest of my life after sleeping in there. His eyes went wide, terrified. "You slept inside?" He did a quick sign of the cross on himself and got back into his car, rolling down the windows before driving away. The words he spoke next would stick with me for the rest of my life. Part of me wishes he'd never said them. Another part is glad he did. "I don't know if this is true," he said, "but I heard somewhere that if you fall asleep somewhere and there's restless spirits inside, they can get inside of you. You're not as protected when you're asleep. That's what I heard, anyway. Just maybe go see a priest or something. Because that place," he pointed at the motel, "that place is full to the brim with restless spirits." For some reason, a question slipped out of my mouth before he could speed away. What if you give the spirits something? A gift of great emotional value. Will that keep them out? He just shook his head. "I don't know anything about that. Ask the priest when you see them. But who knows? Maybe you're onto something." He drove away quickly, kicking up gravel with his tires. We got back into the car and drove away from that haunted place as well. Not speaking for a long, long time. Then, as I was driving, thinking about what the cop had said, Christine put her hand on my leg. Her hands were usually warm, but now it felt cold, clammy, like ice. Gibson's low growl began again in the back seat. I glanced over at Christine, suddenly anxious, and saw that she was smiling. Just happy to get away from that place, I thought at first. I didn't know the half of it. Not yet, anyways. But then she spoke, and I couldn't help but think she sounded different somehow. Older. "Hit the gas, Daddy-O," she said in that unfamiliar voice. "Let's blow this popsicle stand." Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/Jordan Group Horror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow, and see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.